The river wore a skin of ice that broke and mended as the tide breathed. A thin, creaking lattice that the oars worried to pieces with each long pull. Davos stood in the bow and watched the white shards slither past the hull and wheel away into the gray, as if the white knife were shrugging off a cracked old shell for a new one. The fog made a world without edges. Harbor bells tolled somewhere ahead, slow and heavy, off iron clappers, the sound coming to him as if dampened in wool. Closer still, a gull skimmed the surface, its wingtip carving a small wake in the sheen of water, then rose like a scrap of torn sail into the high gray. He cupped his maimed hand to the wind and felt it as a weightless thing, no salt in it, only river cold and the faint ghost of distant smoke. The stumps itched in the cold as they always did. He flexed them inside the glove, then tucked the hand back under his arm as if to warm a child against his ribs. The other hand, his good one, gripped the rail. He could taste the tide on the back of his tongue, a flatness and a bitter, and with it came the old sense that the water was a kind of mind. Not a man's mind, but something older, slow, stubborn, learning its banks and bars by seasons and never forgetting. Another stroke, he called, and the 4 oarsmen answered in the wordless grunt of men accustomed to their own breath for company. The boat was a low-bellied harbor craft, square-sterned and stubborn as a mule. The larger ship had anchored on a sand tongue below, too deep drafted to risk the last turn to the quays. He had chosen to come on alone, with a few hands and a boy, leaving the cargo aboard until he knew what sort of welcome the quays would give. A shadow loomed up in the fog, a timber pier, slick with rime, its posts banded in iron. The oars kissed the piles, drew the boat near as gentle as the hand of a nurse, and the boy leapt up with the hawser rope. He missed the cleat, cursed, and made it on the second try. The rope drew taut, the boat settled. The oars slid inboard with the quick wet clatter of feathered birds. Davos stepped to the pier, and the wood moaned under him. The city was a suggestion at first, a murk of roofs and lean chimneys, a faint green dim glow where some brazier burned beneath an awning. Then the fog shifted with a sigh, and White Harbor took his breath. She sprang up out of the river like a thing that had been sunk under it, and lifted, water streaming from 100 gray shoulders. The quays and timber yards crouched low, built as if to keep their heads down in the wind, but beyond them rose the curtain walls and towers of the Manderley seat, pale stone that looked almost the color of bone in such light, and beyond that, set on its own island where the river bent to embrace the inner harbor, the Wolf's Den, square and heavy and honest as a fist. On the nearer quay, nailed to the front of a counting house, someone had hung a lantern with green glass, and in it a flame burned that showed no smoke. "Gods be good," whispered the boy beside him. He was as much a boy as Davos's youngest had been when he first took him aboard ship. The same angular knees under a too-short cloak, the same bright, watchful eyes that pretended to be bolder than they felt. "I never saw anything so big." "You've seen the sea in a storm," Davos said. "That was bigger. That was different." Davos smiled. "A small thing. Different and bigger can both be true." A man in a shaggy seal fur jacket came out of a hut at the foot of the quay and shuffled toward them with the air of one who would not hurry for fire or winter or any other lord's command. He had a round, raw face. Tears had frozen into the whiskers under his eyes. When he spoke, his breath smoked into the fog. "You," he said. "Who are you, to tie up at the Green Key with no flag?" "Davos," the smuggler knight said, and the words were less than a banner and more honest than one. "I was told to show no colors." "By who told you?" "By the one who sent for me." The man chewed on that. "Names make the world go round. I'm Harbor Micken, Brightwater Quay. I keep tally of who comes and who goes. If you never give a name, you never have to leave." He grinned with an absence of mirth. "But you gave one. That'll do. Come up, sir. The harbor master's warming his chair and will want words." Davos followed him past coils of frozen hawser and stacks of split timber. The river's stink of weed and wet hemp gave way to the harbor's richer stew. Smoked fish, tallow fires, wet wool, tar. A dog nosed rotten planks for morsels and found none. Above them, gulls wheeled and complained in a language of old wives with small grudges. The fog thinned as the dock rose, and there, revealed, was the first green standard he had seen in many months. A merman with a trident on a field that would have been sea-bright in sun, but here looked like deep water. The trident's tines caught the light of the brazier as if they owned it. Inside the counting house, the air was thick as broth. A brazier of charcoal glowed in a corner, and a pot of something hung above it, scenting the room with onions and meat. On the bench beside it slept a fat orange cat with one ear bitten down to a rag. Behind the counter sat a man with a ledger before him, a short neat beard like soot painted on his jaw, hair oiled flat. The harbor master, or else one of his better scrubbed underlings. "Davos," he said as if trying the word on his tongue. "We do not call men sir in the harbor, unless we know they like it." "Do you like it?" "What I like doesn't often weigh much," Davos said. "My lord." The man's mouth bent. "A lord I am not. Tommen of the Keys. I put ships where they will do least harm to the sand and most good to the city. They told me a man might come whose hands are both clean and scarred. I see they were not wrong." His eyes lowered hardly at all to Davos' glove. "You came in light. I have a cog below with a heavier belly," Davos said. "Barrels of hard bread. Sacks of barley and dried peas. A bit of salt pork that doesn't taste too much of salt. Whale oil for men of Ibn, thick and yellow. I thought to see if it would be wanted before I risked the turn." Tommen sniffed the air as if the cargo could be smelled through fog and wood. "It will be wanted. We are hungrier than we show, though we show it more than we like. The river's thin this winter, and the fish have gone down to where it is fatter." He glanced up from his ledger. "You're the Onion Knight. Some have called me such. Do you object?" "I do not." He looked past Tommen toward the stair. "I was told I'd be met." "You're met." Tommen closed the ledger with a careful hand, as if the world might shift under it. "My lord of Manderley sits too easily these days to rise, and the cold makes his joints complain worse than the council. But his son will speak for his father in the harbor, and his steward for the son. We've stewards for the stewards if it comes to that. There's a weight to be made plain before any bargain is struck." He rose, a big man, but it was breadth of shoulder and not a belly, and took from a peg his heavy cloak. "You'll come to the den first. It's the proper place for truths and lies. Both know the way there." They went out by a different door, through an alley where the snow was grayer from footfall and ash, and then up a flight of stone steps that had seen more boots than prayers. The fog had torn itself into flags. Through the rents he could see the inner harbor, a spoon of black water licked smooth by the wind, and on its island the wolf's den, a squat tight thing, with arrow slits like narrow eyes, and a beard of ice along its lower stones where spray had frozen. The bridge to it was wood and iron, hinged on the island side so it could be raised like the jaw of a great fish. It was down now. Torches burned on the gatehouse where the bridge touched stone. "You built your walls for men and your quays for whales," Davos said. He meant to flatter the city, but truth often sounded like flattery when it fit well. Tommen looked at him sidelong. "We built for wolves. The whales only paid for the stone. Come." In the gatehouse, the guard captain claimed their knives with the weary gravity of men who had seen knives do their work. They were led through corridors that had known winter before any man living and would know it after, and then into a hall that startled Davos with its warmth. There was a hearth big as some small cottages he had called home in his boyhood, the fire in it taller than a man, a log crackling thickly as a bone breaks. The air smelled of lampreys and butter, and an onion sweetness that made his mouth tense, with an old memory of standing in a storm, with a sack on his back, and hope like fire in him. On a dais at the far end sat Lord Wyman Manderley in a chair built to both honor and hold him. He was as broad as gossip, his dress a sea of green velvet shot through with pearls, a gold chain that would have cost a shipyard draped over his shoulders. His eyes were startled blue in such a face, as if a bird had flown in and sat behind them. To his right stood a man in a sober gown of black, with his hair cropped to ears, and his face cut from the wood of the pews. The steward, no doubt. A boy of 10 or 12 leaned against the arm of the merman's chair, with the posture of one who had found a way to be both respectful and bored. There were others in the shadows, 2 Bravosi by their feathered hats, an Ibanese merchant by the brow that overhung his eyes like a cliff, a thin, quick little fellow in leather with a Sisterton's salt and wind look to him. But Davos kept his attention where courtesy said it should be. "Davos Seaworth," said Lord Wyman, his voice a slow wave in a round harbor. "Do you find our river up to the work?" "It takes a load grudging," Davos said, "but it takes it. Strong banks, honest current. I've seen worse and praised it." The big man's mouth twitched, perhaps amused, perhaps not. "You are as men describe you. Plain words and no sweetening. In the north, even the sweetening bites." He shifted in the chair, and the chair creaked like a ship's hull in a press of ice. "We have had more stories of you than bread. It's a poor trade, but now there's more bread." "Some," Davos admitted. "I brought what I could find in ports where the Lannisters' gold is thin, and the Tyrell's men slower than their boasts." "And you brought yourself," said the steward, his voice a file across iron. "That was the thing we sent for." Davos inclined his head. "I serve my king. I also serve my conscience. It told me to come. I did not ask which it served first, because I am tired to death of that sort of counting." "Then I see." Lord Wyman lifted a hand, 2 fingers, as if to still a fly. "The counting will be done, but not by you, not today. Sit, if you'll take meat with us. We eat like fat men, even when we go hungry. It's our stubbornness, or our folly. Perhaps the same thing." Davos sat when baited and broke crust when it was placed before him. The bread had been warmed over the hearth, and the heat reached his hands first and then his nose. There was an onion in the broth for the lampreys, a thick sweetness, and it was both comfort and taunt. He ate as a man eats in front of those he must soon ask for something. Slowly, neat and unthreatening, savoring but without closing his eyes. The boy at Lord Wyman's elbow watched him with sly interest until his mother or aunt or nurse showed up in the guise of a hand that pinched his ear gently and drew him back into propriety. The Bravosi spoke low to one another. The Ibanese merchant chewed in the manner of a cow and drank like a forge. The vessel looked small at his mouth. After they had wiped their hands and mouths, the steward stepped forward. "Our Lord would hear the word you carry," he said. "And we," he gestured toward the hall, in which the Bravosi, the Ibanese, the sistermen, and a handful of northern men of ships and counting houses lifted their chins. "We would hear what you offer that is not just words." "I carry no king's writ to wave," Davos said, "and if I had one, I would not wave it here. I have a plan, and those who know me know that my plans are born in hunger and raised in cold. They tend to go on living. Your harbor is the throat of the north. It has been cut before. It will be cut again if your enemies are not my enemies, and if we forget that wolves die when their throats are opened, even if their teeth are sharp. The Tyrells send ships east and say there is no need for northern bellies to be filled when golden ones are close. The Lannisters are coins in men's heads wherever a purse hangs. I have seen Bravos grow fat as the 7 becomes 6 and then 7 again, and in that fat is a lesson. Take what you need and pay your debts, and let no one man sit on the scales and tell you what you weigh. White Harbor is ready to step out of winter's shadow and say, 'Come and trade and eat and swear no oath that binds your wrists to another man's purse.'" "Then say it in fewer words," the steward said, with the stiff courtesy of someone doing his job even when he disliked it. "Make White Harbor a free port," Davos said simply, "and make allies of those who will profit from its freedom." Lord Wyman did not move. He might have been carved from butter that had chilled. Only his eyes shifted. "A free port," he repeated, "a word with salt on it. It tastes of the narrow sea. Bravos says free and means ours. Tyrosh says free and means paint. Pentos says free and means we will bleed later, not now." "What do you mean?" "I mean this," Davos said, and the words came with warmth behind them that had little to do with the fire. "No tariffs on grain, fish, oil, timber, wool, iron bars, flax, anything that warms and feeds and builds. No harbor fees for ships bringing such things for a winter to White Harbor. The city will earn by its work, not by a gate that turns on a man's hunger. Guilds are to be welcomed and bound by fair law. No man is to be sold in this port, nor any woman or child, nor any debt turned into a chain. Those who break that law will find the river colder than it looks. Those who honor it will find their coins spend sweeter here than anywhere between Hardhome and the Stepstones. Put it in a charter. Nail it to the counting houses. Read it in the den. Burn it into the green glass of your lamps. And the coin we do not collect. The walls do not caulk themselves, the steward said. Davos turned to him. I sailed for years on bribes and avoided fees because they were fat and lazy. When I pay a fair charge, I pay it and praise the harbor that asks it. Your men know that your quays rot. They also know how to keep a ledger honest. Let there be a fee on silk, pepper, lace, on those things that warm the eye while the belly aches. Men will complain and pay. Let your own shipwrights take a tithe in work, not coin. If an Ibanese ship takes 30 barrels of oil out and brings 30 in, let the empty come home with grain stuffed to their ribs from Davos, because this is the port that will pay them in peace. They will bring you coin, not because you squeezed it from their throats, but because you gave them a place where they could breathe. Free is not free. It is a different reckoning. I know a little of reckoning. And now, the Ibanese merchant rumbled something like admiration. He has chewed winter's nails, he said, thick-tongued. He knows the taste. Lord Wyman put his hand to his breast as if to ease a pain that had been there a long time. You would make us a city that eats like a wolf and pretends to be a fish, he said. The castle men will not like it. Then you must be a fat fish that knows how to bite, Davos said. One of the Bravasi, thin as a reed, with a nose like a quill, lifted 2 fingers in that half-mocking way they had when addressing anyone else's gods. You speak as a man with a bank behind him. I speak as a man with debts, Davos said. I will show my ledger to any man in this hall. The names of sons burned by green fire at Blackwater. The old hunger at Storm's End. The names of knights who ate onions and called them meat. The faces of men who drown in fog because a harbor chain refused to rise in time. He very nearly stopped then, because his voice had gone hoarse and honor demanded that a man not weep while he asked for other men's gold. He swallowed. I have spoken with men of the Iron Bank. They will not lend to fools. But for an honest return, they will stake a river. The return is here. The White Knife knows it. The counting houses should learn what a river already knows. Nenderol. And there it was. The flicker in Lord Wyman's eyes as something sluggish and grand turned in the deep under him. The big man breathed, and the chair sighed, and a hand went up to his temple, not as if he were weary of the talk, but as if he were measuring it against the ache of a winter mind and finding it less than the pain there. My steward does not like you, Lord Wyman said, and that might have been humor, except it was too tired. He says you are a smuggler, and smugglers do not change. He has a book that says so. I have other books. They say other things. I also have a boy who came out of the sisters with news I will not speak aloud in such a hall. He says wolves live who were thought dead. He says Skagos is not only a place where the map is wrong. I have eaten men in my mind and smiled as I did it. I did not get so fat on lampreys alone. That is to say, I can play the lord that the Boltons wish me to be, and the lord I am. Both, and not spill from either chair. I can make a harbor that takes coin from men who would rather die than give it, and I can spend that coin as I please. If I were to do such a thing, where would I put the first hammer stroke? In the river, Davos said without having to think. Your channel wants dredging. The shoal, below the bend, moves like a thief. It will take a ship with a winter belly, and you will lose both bread and men to the bend. Dredge it. Plant piles where the ice scours worst, not on the outer face where every man would place them if he listened to the wind, but under the lip where the eddy eats. I will show your engineers. Build a beacon at the mouth. Not one of the old lights that a child could hide behind in fog, but a stone tower on the seaward bar with a lantern, and if you can manage it and your masons are better than I judge them, a mirror of polished copper to throw the flame. Men will weep to see it in a gale and call the merman father. and put law into the wolf's den, not rumor. We will write a charter, and carve it, and read it to the river. Men listen when stone speaks. Bender. You speak as if you were born to do this, the steward said in his dry way. I was born in a smell of fish, Davos said. But I learned to count. The Sisterton man spoke at last. He had a face like a dried cod, and the ladies see in his stare. If you open your gates, he said, will you bid the sisters come and tie up, and sell their catch on your boards? My lords don't love to ask leave of a fat mainlander to take what they've fished. Will you pay a fish tithe? Davos asked. 1 in 20 netted, to go to women who cook for men who are too thin and cold to wait on a good season? The sisterman twitched his lips in a smile. We pay our gods in fish. We can pay a fat man. 1 in 20's honest when the sea is as lean as this, and will spit on the shoes of any slaver who tries to buy a child on our quay. We do now. Bender. I would not have doubted it, Davos said. Then come, bring your boats, bring your salt, bring your grudges and we'll salt them too. There was laughter at that, honest and tired. Lord Wyman lifted a hand, and when his fingers fell, the hall breathed out. We will do it, he said. If a favor can be called a law, we will make one. We will write it as the smuggler says, and as my steward amends, and as my conscience affixes a seal. We will show it to the Iron Banks man, and ask him if he can count. We will nail it to every door that's not a church, and carve it into stone where water will read it. And if men come to say, we have no right to make laws about coin and river and boats, we will show them the wolf's den, and let it do the speaking. His eyes shifted to Davos again, a measure and a weight. You will show my engineers the river. You will tell my shipwrights where to put their piles. You will stand on the bar in a fog, and tell me when the sound the water makes is wrong. If you do that, and we still fail, I will say so. I will say, the onion knight gave me onions, but I had no teeth to chew them. Davos felt something old in him loosen, and a pain, new, as a cut ease, under a bandage. I will stand on your bar, and on your piles, and on your law, he said. And I will be there when the first ship comes through the fog to tie up to the free boards. Lord Wyman nodded, and let his head fall back against the chair. For a long breath he closed his eyes, and the lids were as pale as the belly of a fish. Then he opened them. Tommen, he said, show him the place where the river and the word meet. Set him with men who will not argue themselves into frostbite. Fetch my son. Wake him if he has found another chair to sleep on. I want his hands in this mud. They left the warmth of the hall for the stone that remembered every winter. On the island side of the den there was a stair cut into the rock, steep and treacherous with a skin of old ice. Davos went down it the way a man goes down a ladder in a storm, hand to hand, foot to foot, trusting each thing in turn and nothing entirely. The river breathed under him. It had a different voice here, quieter and meaner. The kind a lean man uses when he tells you why your face looks punched. Tommen led him along the tiled walk to the lower quay, where the piles drove down into an ancient bed and a fringe of spoon ice ran like a white beard under the quay. We have 5 dredges, Tommen said. 3 float. The other 2 float when they feel like it. The men who run them drink. It seems to be the only way to keep warm. We'll sober them with work, Davos said. He crouched and put his good hand to the water as if it were a horse that needed soothing. You feel that? He lifted his eyes. There's a ridge there under the skin. It's new. The current throws up a ridge where the bend and the tide speak bad of each other. Tommen crouched beside him and wetted his fingers and grimaced at the cold. I feel nothing but the foolishness of my choice to put my hand in the river in winter. Then listen. Davos closed his eyes. The water knocked at the piles in a way he did not like. There. Hear the hollow knock? Not the solid. That's sand under a crust. You can cut that edge in a day with 2 good hands on the scoop and a winch that doesn't sulk. It'll just fill again, if we leave the upper lip. Work from the inside out. Mention? Tommen's mouth did a small thing that might have been grudging respect. You talk like a river man. I talk like a man who never had a port behave itself when he needed it to. Davos straightened and the old bones in his back complained, but their voice was low, and he could forget their talk. He squinted downriver. The fog there seemed to tremble with some work it could not hide. "What's that?" "Boat," Tommen said. "Fool or brave or deceitful. It's always one of the three when a man comes up in such a mist." "It's the cog from below," Davos said. "We tied her on the safe tongue. But the safe tongues in strange beds like to kiss other men. If she broke free..." The fog peeled aside. She loomed up in it, their cog, with her belly high, the rivulets of water running off her sides making her look like a woman who had just risen from a cold bath. Someone on her foredeck waved, a rag of a thing too bright for the day. The cog's stern slewed. She kissed the pale line of the shallows with the soft, deadly thump of a horse stepping into a pit. "7 hells," Davos said softly. "It's the bend that moved under her she didn't." Tommen barked and men came, as if he had a string to their backs that set them moving when he pulled. In a breath, there were lines thrown, and a winch clattering, and half a prayer mumbled with no god addressed. Davos did what he had done 100 times when other men had averted their eyes and called it fortune later. He stepped to the nearest pile, shucked his glove in his teeth, spat on his palm, and reached for the hawser that came singing out of the fog. It hit his hand and burned him through the spit. He looped it twice, set his heel, and felt the old joy. Nothing but rope and weight and the mind that tells you where to place a foot. The line went taut. The cog's stern wagged like an offended cat's tail. The winch screamed. Someone swore in Ebenese and made it sound heartfelt. Davos glanced over his shoulder. "Get a kedge anchor out," he shouted. "Longboat, 2 men, and 1 who can count. Row her to the inside lip. Drop it where the sound deepens. Not where you'd think. Where it feels like your stomach fell. Men and now won't show." Tommen did not argue. He ran. Men shouted at other men in voices that were proof of why lords never rule harbors. Harbors rule themselves when they must. The longboat slid off into the fog. For a moment, it looked as if it had simply disappeared into a sheet of gray hung by a god between one breath and the next. Then there was a splash like a thing being dropped and not pleased with it, and a man's cry of, "Let go," and the longboat heaved as if shrugging off an insult. "Now," Davos said, as if the river would listen if men did. "Ease to seaward. Give me that again." "No, the other way. We'll only grind her if..." That's it. Heave the winch in time to her little waves. Feel when she wants it, don't just take it." He heard himself and felt a foolish fierceness. As proud as a father giving advice on how to rock a babe. A man and a river. A rope and a boat. There was comfort in the way such things set themselves to rights when you gave them your work instead of your clever. The cog lifted prettily, like a woman letting a man guide her onto a step she could have taken herself. She slid free of the lip. The line went slack enough to kiss his fingers. Davos cussed the rope, softly, for old time's sake, and because it felt good in his mouth. He rubbed his stumps without thinking, then pulled the glove back on. When the cog's stern swung in where it belonged, the longboat came back, crewed by men with faces like raw beef and grins like scars. "You have saved your cargo," Tommen said. And for the first time his voice sounded as if it belonged more to Davos than to the fog. "And you have saved my reputation. I put that ship on the tongue below, and if I had watched her slide up to my quay with her ribs cracked, I'd have had to lose my beard or my job." "You keep the beard," Davos said. "You look better with it." Tommen looked as if he did not know whether to laugh. "Come," he said after a beat. "We'll mark the lip and get the first dredge at it before her crew can warm their hands and forget how the river just tried to eat their dinner." They worked. He forgot his king and his debts for an hour and a half. The world narrowed to the swing and splash of the scoop and the clack of the winch's pawls, and the way a rope will talk to the bone when the man want. There were men who wanted to argue about how men had argued about where the bar lay last year and the year before. Davos told them to bring a pot or a hook and return when the rope stopped speaking. The river accepted such governance. The first spill of wet sand came up smoking in the cold and stinking like rot. Men cursed and laughed at the smell because cursing and laughing made them forget what came out of their own bellies at the end of a lean winter. By noon, which was an idea more than a light in such a day, The Ben's lip was bleeding sand in the right place. Davos wiped his hands on a rag and found, to his embarrassment, that the rag stank worse than he did. Tommen appeared at his shoulder with 2 cups. He had the grace to hand the warmer one to Davos. The liquid inside could not decide whether it was ale or soup. He did not press it. It didn't matter. "You'll come with me," Tommen said, "to the counting house we spoke of. The Bravosi want to count aloud in front of us, which is their way of telling us they know how to count. The Ibanez wants to show how many barrels he has, and remind us that he can count to 30 with one hand, if each finger stands for a ship. The Sisterton man wants to spit into the brazier and see if we flinch. If we get to speak, we will I have a charter begun," Davos said. He tapped the inside of his doublet. "I could be wrong about half of it, and would rather be told so now than see men laugh later." "Men will laugh anyway," Tommen said. "It's how they breathe when they're afraid. But we can write words that will make some of them shut their mouths. That's worth a brush of ink." The counting house in question had a view of the inner harbor through a slit window that made men lean to see it. Davos liked it better than a broad view. Such a window made men feel the river was earned, not given. A Bravosi keyholder had already made himself a city within the room. A small forest of tallies of bone and strings of copper coins, and a square of green silk laid on the table, as if the wood would infect the numbers if the silk did not intervene. The man, whose name was Noho, had eyes the color of tea. He poured his voice like tea as well. Slow, amber, with little steam. The Ibanez was called Osik, and wore a mane of fur around his shoulders, as if his mother had birthed a short bear and a long man at once, and they were still negotiating. The Sisterton man called himself Hedrick, though it was plain no one in his village had ever called him that, unless they wanted a new scar. Davos laid his paper on the green silk. Noho flicked his eyes at the insolence of paper on silk, and then managed himself back to courtesy with a swallow. Tommen set his big hand on the corner of the paper, as if that could keep the room from skidding into foolishness. "Read," Noho invited. Davos cleared his throat. "By Lord Wyman Manderley's hand and seal, under the care of the Wolf's Den and the eyes of the Merman, let it be known that White Harbor opens its boards and bars to all ships that come for trade in winter with honest wares, and claims the right to set law for that trade within sight of the green lamps and the sound of this bell." He tapped the harbormaster's bell with his knuckle. He tapped the harbormaster's bell with his knuckle, and it gave out a low that any cargo of grain, fish of any waters, oil, timber, wool, iron, salt, flax, tallow, hides, and fruits dried or pickled shall be free of tariff, and quay dues for a winter and a winter more, so long as need remains and famine is not sworn to be passed by the den. That any cargo of silk, dyestuff, jewels, spices, wines finer than a common man's drink, Mirish lace and Volantine glass shall pay a fair due. He named it, so that the boards that rot are replaced, and the beacon's flame never dies, and those who keep the peace in the harbor are paid in coin that does not lie. That no man, woman, or child shall be sold in this harbor, and any who are brought in chains shall be freed with a gift from the master for his folly, and a mark of shame on his face for his crime. That no debt shall be turned into a rope in this harbor. That quarrels between men of the sea shall be tried each 7th day in the Wolf's Den by law, that both can hear. And the water shall be the law where the law cannot be written. That any ship may claim the green light in a storm regardless of pledge or faith, and no captain shall be denied safety for the color of his flag. Them? He raised his eyes from the paper. Noho's face remained a pool that reflected what it wished. Davos could not see past the reflection. Osik made a sound like a ship dragging anchor over rock. "Add this," Tommen said, as if he were listing a timber. "That if any man or woman comes with coin of a realm that is at war with a sworn lord of the north, he shall spend it in the harbor and not beyond, unless the den has good reason to say otherwise." Davos wrote that in careful lines. The quill scratched like a mouse under a floor. "Add this," Hedrick of the sisters said. "If a sister boat is found with a child in chains, the captain will answer to me without a court." He showed his teeth. "It'll be quicker." Tommen waited a beat. "We will write instead that any sister boat found will be tried on the quay within a day, and if guilt is found, the penalty to be declared by the harbor court, with the Sisterton's word weighed heavy in the measuring. Hedrick spat, not in the brazier, but on the floor. Words. Aye. So long as men watching know what they mean. I know what they mean, Osik grunted. In Ibsar, they put hot iron on the cheap. Men stop wanting to buy if other men know they've bought before. Benderol. We will mark, Tommen said, in that same sober ledger voice. And we will mark so men see. It will be broken, Noho said. In 6 months, in 6 days, in 6 hours. Some man will steal with the law and call it his right. The law will be dirt under boots at some quay where the wind is worse than this one. He lifted one hand in a delicate shrug. It is still worth writing. Davos felt the small pleasure that comes each time the world refuses to be only one thing. We will read it every first day with the harbor bells in a fisherman's tongue, and a Bravosi's, and any other tongue that keeps a belly from believing it's alone, he said. And we will carve it into the stone under the beacon. You have need of priests, Noho murmured. Men like rules more when a god wrote them. We have the river, Davos said. It's older than your sea lord, older than my king. It will do as a priest. They worked through the afternoon. Men came and went, sent to mark piles, or set a crew to scrape barnacles off a hull, or check the winch pawls for a crack that would make them betray a load. In the work of making the free harbor, there was no single hero's moment. There was rope and sand and ink and breath that smoked every time a man laughed and made other men feel bold. Before the light went entirely to lead, Tommen sent a boy with the parchment to the den and another to Wyman's counting hall, and drew a third toward them with a boy's greedy eagerness for anything that looked like work that could taste like trouble. Go, Tommen told Davos at last. If you don't eat now, you'll only think of food while you talk. And talk goes worse when a man's tongue is 2 parts wish and 1 part word. They ate onion broth with barley in it, and a joint of mutton that had been cooked, salted, cooked again, and given a glaze with something sweet, as if it were a child. It was ugly and comforting. Davos took his bowl and cup to the corner of the room that had a little window set into it, and sat on a stool that had learned 1,000 postures of men before it had to learn his. For a little while, he let the room's noise wash over him. Men use the same words in every harbor. He had heard a Myrish captain complain of a worm in rope as if the worm were a man, and the man were a god. He had listened to a summer islander tell the tale of a storm as if it were a woman's marriage. He let the words pass and thought of nothing, which was a kind of grace. Then he reached into his breast and drew out a small roll of old parchment and a blunt stick of charcoal, and wrote, hunched to keep his writing under the shelter of his own ribs, as if it were a child he wanted to keep warm. My lady. He had never found what name to give the girl, now a woman, who had put her hand in his and laughed once at a joke so poor it could have been his. He wrote Shireen and the charcoal broke, and he sharpened it on his teeth and tried again. My lady, the river reminds me of the Blackwater. But when I say that I lie a little to myself, so I can stay brave. This river is honest and wants us alive. The other wanted us dead and fed green fire to our sons and made the sky a lie. I'm in a hall built for men who are slow to laugh but laugh longer when they do. They eat well and pretend not to. And they blink as if they have smoke in their eyes when they speak of wolves. Their lord is as big as a whale and has a mind that swims like one. Slow at the surface, quick and terrible under it. He will do this thing, I asked. I do not know if it will save us. It will feed people a while. I think that is better than a plan that is clever and does nothing. The river is old. It tells me not to wait on clever. If the gods look at us, ask them to give me rope that doesn't rot, and men who keep their hands when they pull. He folded the scrap when it was done and did not sign it. Because sometimes a man does not name himself to his own heart. When he writes for fear the heart will answer and say a thing he cannot forget. He put it back inside his doublet and closed his eyes. The stool was warm under him. He allowed himself the cruelty of a minute in which he saw his sons, and then he let the minute go and stood again. There was more work. There was always more work. By the second day, the charter had a seal in green wax that looked enough like a merman if a man were willing to squint. There is a kind of joy in the ugliness of new law. It looks like a foal, all knees and too long bone, and you can see the fast horse inside if you know where to look. The beacon on the seaward bar could not be built in a day, or a month, or a season, but a pile of stones appeared where there had been none, and a boy sent to piss on them came back with a pride that set him ahead taller in his own mind. Piles were driven where the current ate its own, and the winches learned to sing a rhythm that matched the river's song. A Sisterton sloop came in with a deck flaked white from a herring catch. The men aboard looked as if they had been made out of rope and wind, and asked after the law like men who were offering their own bones to a blacksmith to be shaped into something sharper. Hedrick spit into the brazier and no one flinched. Men laughed, and he grinned, and the Free Harbor learned that some men test to see if a thing will stand, not because they want to break it, but because they want to lean on it later. On the fourth morning, a Bravosi ship with a painted eye slid into the harbor so softly that it looked as if the water had decided to be a floor under it. Noho's mouth did something between a prayer and a calculation. He went out with Tommen to meet her and came back with a scroll that had inside it a smaller scroll. The smaller scroll had in it figures that made Tommen's ears pink, and for a moment, the map of the winter shifted. There would be grain. There would be oil. There would be, if the gods did not decide to be clever themselves, hope. There was also a boy. Davos found him near the wolf's den one evening, sitting on the wall with his legs dangling as if he had forgotten to put them away after a workday. He was too thin and too alert by half, and when Davos hailed him, he turned like a bird who had just remembered men sometimes throw stones. "You're too near the cold," Davos said. "If you fall, you'll make a hole in the ice with your head, and then you'll sit with that hole around your neck like a fool's collar." The boy considered the advice, turned it on its side, and decided he could pretend to take it. He slid down onto the safer stone and eyed Davos with frankness. One ear was torn, a tidy crescent missing, as if a bite had been carefully measured and then taken. He did not speak. "You're from the sisters," Davos said. "You move like a man who learned the water and shoes that leak." The boy inclined his head. "You come with Hedrick?" A headshake. "With a boat of your own?" "No." "With men who don't know they've brought a boy?" "Aye." The mouth twitched. "You're one of those wild ones who count with their scars," Davos said, meaning to tease and finding instead that the words felt a little like prayer. "You have the look of someone who has seen a wolf on a shore where only seals should be." The eyes flicked. It was the smallest thing. But in a harbor, small things are where the truth lives. Davos put his hands on the parapet and looked out at a river that had begun to learn his name. "If you know where they are," he said, as if he were talking to the river and not to the boy, "you should tell a man who can make a world change under that knowledge. If you don't, the river will keep its own counsel and eat them one by one as if they were seals. And the river is not cruel. It only does what it does." The boy's mouth compressed into something that looked more like a wound than a smile. He touched his torn ear, a nervous habit, or a ritual. Then he slid away with the particular speed of boys who have never learned to walk at the same pace as their thoughts. Davos did not follow. He did not need to. The boy would find him again, or find Lord Wyman's steward, or find Tommen. The river would cut its channel without him. He was not the only weight in the river's mind. That night, the charter was read in the wolf's den for the first time. The hall was crowded well beyond what fire and stone preferred, and the torches made the air taste of tallow and made the eyes of men look wet when they were not. Tommen stood with the scroll and read in the harbor tongue, and then Noho's clerk read in Bravosi, his words like a deck under bare feet. Uzik tried in his own heavy music, and men laughed with affection because the sounds were honest and had no need of their laughter to stand. Hedrick refused to read in Sisters' salt talk. He said the river could translate. That too was a kind of prayer. When it was done, Davos leaned his head back and looked at the timbers that crossed the den's ceiling like the ribs of some old ship, left stranded on an island and made into a church. He had not thought to be happy again in a hall. He had thought such happiness dead with his boys. But something like happiness filled him, and because he was an honest man, he did not spit it out simply because it came into his mouth when he was not looking. Later, he went out onto the quay and stood where the river said the same three things over and over in 1,000 different voices. This is me. This is winter. This is time. The fog had lifted to a pale, hard sky, and a half-moon made the ice shine in small plates. The new beacon, which was, as yet, only a waist-high mound of stones surmounted by a brazier on a tripod, threw out its small, stubborn light. It would take men months to heap it into a tower, and those months would be cold, and their fingers would learn to hate their bones. "You're smiling," said a voice that was all butter and iron. He turned and found Lord Wyman in a litter, pulled by two men who looked as if they had drawn the lot and done so gladly. The big man's breath smoked in great plumes. A fur thrown over him looked small, which was a drama in itself. "I am," Davos said. "Blood or bread?" "Bread," Davos said. "And the knowledge that we can make it from stones and rope if we must." Wyman's eyes cut toward the small beacon and back. "You think men will come?" "They always do when there's something here they want," Davos said. "If not honesty, then coin. If not coin, then a safe quay in a bad fog. They will come. And when the ones we hate come, because it is the safest quay, and we have sworn to be free, and to take all, what then?" The Lord's tone was not quite a taunt. It was the curiosity of a man who had seen men find shrugs to stand in when they should have stood straight. "We will take their coin and give them bread," Davos said. "And then we will count how much stronger we are with their coin inside our walls. And we will see if we need their love as much as we needed their gold." "I think we will not." Lord Wyman smiled with half his mouth. "You are a hard man with soft eyes." "I am a smuggler with a king," Davos said. "A man can hold both." Wyman lifted his head a fraction to look at the river, the way a lord looks at an old story. "You do not know everything, Onion Knight. There are wolves, and there are stories of wolves, and the stories sometimes bite worse than the teeth. I say this to you because you are the sort of man who will understand why I have not said it to others. When this winter ends, men will tell a story about White Harbor that will not be entirely true. They will say we opened our gates because we were too fat to keep them shut. They will say we sold our souls for grain. I will let them say it. The North keeps the truth much as a wife keeps a knife in the kitchen drawer. We know where it is when we need it." "I know a little about knives in drawers," Davos said. He flexed his maimed hand in the glove. The stumps did not hurt. They held silence. "I also know a little about stories that bite. But if a child eats because of a bad story, then let the story bite. I'll hold the wound if it asks for it." Lord Wyman's eyes had the winter shine of a man who would weep in a dark room and let no one know it. "You and my conscience are troublesome men," he said. "I should have had you both drowned when you first came near my harbor." "You tried with the bend," Davos said. "It didn't take." They stood, two men of awkward shape in a night that had no interest in their small fire, and did not speak for a time. It is a kind of luxury to be quiet with a man who understands why. When Wyman's litter-bearers shivered as one, the Lord stirred, and let himself be turned back toward the den. "Tomorrow," he said, "let the ironmongers talk. Let them count. Let them find a sum that has less hunger in it. Then go stand on the seaward bar and tell me what you see. First light." "Men?" "First light," Davos said. He slept in a room that had a window with frost that had drawn on it ferns and fish in the hands of children. He woke before the boy who had been promised to wake him came, because men who have lived part of their life by tides do not need boys for that work. He broke his beard off his blanket with a little laugh at himself and tasted the day the way a dog tastes air when it comes near to a rabbit's burrow. The day had a clean bite to it. Wind out of the north-northeast, ice that would hold a little where it had not yesterday, a promise of a brightness that would not warm. He went to the seaward bar. Two carpenters were already there, half drowned in their own cloaks, looking at the ring of stones as if I could turn it into a tower. Tommen came behind him with a leather bag that clinked and a man with a spade who looked like he had been born to it. Long hands, a back that carried sorrow and timber in equal measure. Hedrick of the Sisters was there, chewing something that steamed in the cold, and glancing at the line where river married sea, as if expecting an old enemy to come walking across the ice. Noho sent a clerk who walked like a stork, legs stiff and humorless. The bar wore a winter beard, rimed grass and spines of ice where the tide let go. Beyond it, the sea spoke in its own tongue, different from the river, wider, lazier, crueler when it chose, but less obsessed with men. Davos splayed his boots, took the measure of the slipperiness, and walked to the mound. He laid a hand on the topmost stone. It was cold enough to make his palm scream, and he removed it, and smiled because the scream felt like a truth as honest as any law. "We will raise it with barges," Tommen said, "and with men who swear they came to town for other work." "We'll raise it with pride," Hedrick muttered. "Men will work for a light that keeps them alive." "They'll work for coin," said Noho's clerk, and then looked embarrassed when men glanced at him with the kindness they keep for those who have not yet learned to be quiet for their own good. The wind opened its mouth and bit at their ears. It carried with it a far smell of smoke that was not White Harbor's. Davos turned his head, sniffed, and closed his eyes. He thought of the coast that lay to the south. The Flintslands, Cold Stream, the headlands where the cliffs wore beards of icicles, and broke off in thunder that had nothing to do with men. He thought of the far ports beyond, Sisterton, the Fingers, the Vale's tight-laced harbor. And beyond that, men he did not like. He thought of how a story travels in winter, slow with long legs. "We will need a chain," he said, half to himself, and the other half to Tommen. "Not to keep men out." He lifted a hand to forestall the steward's argument he could already hear, but to keep ice from marching into the inner harbor and setting men's work to splinters. "Put iron in the mouth and you can hold a little of the ice back when you haul. The river will thank you since you've told it to behave in other ways." Tommen rubbed his chin. "We have chain. We will need more. We'll take it out of men's jewelry and lie to them if they ask where it went. Tell them you hung it round the harbor's neck," Hedrick said. "All fat cities like necklaces. This one will have a chain that tugs back when it's admired. Nandero. Put that in a poem," Tommen said dryly, and Hedrick laughed. They set lines for the barges and marked the bar with wands of willow, and Davos taught a boy how to hear the difference between ice that would bear and ice that would tell you a story about bearing and laugh while you drowned. By noon, a light like pewter had crawled up the sky and sat there as if waiting to see whether men would do something worth watching. The first barge came slow, pushed by 6 men who looked as if they had been made of rope, and behind it another with stones piled as high as it could take without falling in love with the bar and never leaving it again. "Your charter," Tommen said, as one speaks in a different room from the one men can see. "My steward says we will need to go to the Sept End and have it blessed. He says men trust a god to make their coin honest." "Take it to the Sept," Davos said, "and to the god's wood. Nail it to the heart tree if you like, though the face may not be grateful for the whole. Take it to the river, and we will bless it there as well. Now, you put much on water." "It's where I learned to stand," Davos said simply. In the afternoon, a yellow ship showed on the line where sea meets sight. It came slow and cautious, as a man stepping into a room full of enemies. Men shaded their eyes with their hands. Noho's clerk blinked, and seeing the paint on the prow, wrote something down with exaggerated care. Hedrick spat, but not unkindly. "A ship from Gulltown," he judged, "or one who bought his paint there. They'll want to see if your law is a net or a sail." "Nash. We'll show them," Tommen said. "We'll show them we can count, and we can read, and we can say no while our mouths look like IE." Davos watched the yellow ship's careful advance and felt, in the workman at his back, a shift as subtle as the river's. Men straighten when a stranger's eye is on them. He saw the harbor heave its shoulders and decide how to be seen. It would be seen as a place where men worked. That was the best face a harbor could put on. At dusk, when the barge crews had hands like stone and the workers had run out of curses and begun to recycle the old ones with affectionate invention, Davos went back into the den and stood under the carved merlings on the pillars and waited to see if hunger would make him rude. It did not. The stew was different and the bread less warm, and that too was a kind of lesson. The first days taste like hope, and the days that follow taste like work. He preferred the latter. Hope stuck in the teeth. It was then the boy found him again, the one with the torn ear. He came like a small winter, quiet and intent. He touched Davos' sleeve without reverence and tugged. Once, Davos followed him out without making a noise in his own mind. He did not tell Tommen. He did not tell Lord Wyman. He walked after a boy's thin back down a side stair that had not seen a broom in years, and through a door that stuck in a way that a carpenter could be made to feel guilty for. Outside, the fog had turned to a light that had no sun in it. The boy moved along the quay like a rat that had decided to be a ghost for the evening. Davos kept him in sight and did not step on the ice where it wore that particular sheen that amounts to a lie. They came to the little postern on the riverside where the den's old stones sat as if they had no interest in the day and the night's constant bargaining. The boy slipped through and Davos after, and they found themselves in a bight of the quay that the fog had made into a bowl. There stood Hedrick, and with him a man Davos had not seen before. He was all angles and worry, with eyes that had learned to keep secrets because none of his teeth could. He held his cap in his hands as if it were a small animal he planned to put into the river if it would not be quiet. "This is the one," Hedrick said, and his voice had lost its humor and found the sisters hard shore. "He says he's seen wolves where only seals should be. He says he ran into a skerry to wait out a weather and waited there 3 days and watched a ship go in and not come out. And then came another man in a skin boat and made a sign with his hands that I know. A sign for wolves." The man with the cap swallowed. "I went in to keep my boat in one piece," he said, misery chewing at his words. "I come out to see the sign. I go up to the mouth to see what the wolves ate. There was no eating. There was a ship with a broken mast and men on her who did not throw rope to me when I called. They only looked. A boy on the foreship had red hair and a face like a maid, and he laughed when I swore and he showed me a knife he had. And then he showed me a knife he had, and then he showed me his teeth. I know that face." "You do not," Hedrick said gently. "You know a face like it." The man wrung his cap as if it tried to get away. "I know that face," he said stubbornly. Davos' heart, which had learned all the ways a heart can misunderstand a thing and all the ways it can be broken, began to beat in a new way. It felt like the time he had stood with a sack of onions on his back, under a storm, and had known the gate would open. It felt like the bar give under his boots when the rope went taut. He did not say the names that came into his head. He did not look around for eaves. He stood very still, as if he were the harbor and the news were a ship, and he must decide how to welcome it without spilling what he had already gathered. "You'll tell this to the Lord," Hedrick said, "but I wanted you to hear it too. If you're going to build a harbor that brings men here with the truth in their mouths, you should know what the truth brings." "It brings work," Davos said. His voice was very calm. It scared him a little, how calm it was. He slept not at all that night. In the morning, the yellow ship from the south tied up on the free boards as if it had always known how. Men in veil cloaks stood at the rail and looked down their long noses at the river and did not allow themselves to look impressed. They were impressed. Noho's clerk was one of the first across their gangplank, which had the good manners to be snow-swept, and his pen ticked like a beetle in the counting house for half an hour after. The Ibanese poured oil and took coin, and pretended not to count the profit, and the Sisterton boat cut its belly open, and spilled shining herring that slid across the boards like new coin. The chainmen measured. The dredges grumbled. Tommen laughed once, and looked surprised that he had. In the den, Lord Wyman took the news of wolves with a blink that meant he had known it already, and wanted to see whether the telling would change itself in the mouth of a second man. It did not. Wyman breathed out through his nose, and then breathed in, as if he had decided at last to eat the day laid before him, and would make a meal of it. "We will send no men yet," he said. "We will work at the river. We will get our law into the bones of the quay, and we will let the story of the wolves travel with the story of the free harbor. And we will see which story men think is more worth risking their boats for. Then we will decide which boat we will risk." "And no," Davos nodded. It was not what he would have said. It was better than what he would have said. A man with a mind that swam under 9 stones of fat had decided to be cautious. Winter loves a cautious lord. The days gathered into a rope. The rope held. Men pulled on it. When it stretched, Davos showed them how to rap it twice. And when it sang under strain, he made them stop and listen. Men brought grain in sacks bleached by old sun from farther south than most of them had ever named. Women who had learned to boil nothing and feed children air when they had to took grain in their hands and wept into it, and then turned and cooked, and did not weep again until the night, when the children slept. Braavosi murmured in corners and smiled with humility that had been bought dear. The Ibanese set their barrels in stacks like small towers and sniffed at them as if the oil were a wife whose fidelity they did not trust. The Sisterton men spat and laughed, and decided the free boards were a place they could fill with their boots and still call home. The chain went up in the mouth. It lay in the water like an old snake, coiled and patient. Men said rude things to it, and promised to love it if it behaved. A boy in a dark cap slipped in under a pile one day and came out with a rat in his hand. He carried it across the quay like a trophy, and then flung it into the river with a ceremony that made 3 men clap and 1 man look away because he was thinking of something that had nothing to do with rats. All the while, the wind changed, and it changed again, and men watched it with the ruined hope of men who have cared too long about wind. One late morning, when the river's skin was breaking up into plates that spun like shields under the quay, Davos walked the length of the free boards and stopped at the end where the ice was thickest and the water slowest, and where if a thing rose from the river to try to bite the harbor, it would rise. He leaned on the rail and looked at his own breath. It looked like smoke from a poor fire. He felt the weight of the new law in a pouch under his doublet. He had not known paper could weigh anything. He thought again of Shireen. He wondered if he would see her in the spring. He wondered if there would be a spring that year. Men lied to themselves even when they knew better. He told himself there would be a spring because he was too old to get out of bed in the morning otherwise. He became aware of Tommen beside him as he became aware of the river. Slowly, then all at once. "You did not sleep," Tommen said. "Some nights I keep watch," Davos said. Tommen grunted. "I had thought you were a man who does not keep watch because he trusts his ropes." "I trust my ropes because I keep watch," Davos said, and found a smile hiding in his mouth like a small fish. Tommen laughed. "There it is," he said. "I needed a thing like that today. Noho sent a man with a count that made my head ache, and Usyk has found a leak in his memory with regard to last week's barrels, and Wylas has found a leak in a wall and has put 5 men at it, as if a wall were a man who would be shamed into not crying if enough men watched him. I needed to hear a rope talk." "You are a rope." I am a smuggler," Davos said. "A rope that knows how to count." Tommen nodded, perfectly solemn. "A rope, then." The free harbor had taken root. That is a strange sentence to write about a thing made of stone and wind and law. But it felt true each time Davos said it to himself, with his mouth closed. It had taken root like a hardy weed in a stone crack. If the winter wished to tear it out, it would have to bring a hand. He did not know if the hand would be a storm out of the east, or men with pink flayed banners, or a fat southern fleet with illegal paper for a sail. He did not know whether the boy would lead him to a wolf or a story about one. He did not know whether his law would last longer than the beer that was drunk in honor of it. On the first night, he only knew that a bar that had been in the wrong place was in the right place now, because men had put their backs to it, and that a beacon that had been a brazier on 3 sticks was now a ring of stones that would be a tower, and that every day men came to the green lights at dusk, as if they were the color of permission for a thing most men are slow to ask for: the right to live. He put his hand on the rail and felt the splinters. He welcomed them. The world that has no splinters is a lie told by men who want to sell you softer wood. Behind him, in the counting house, a bell sounded. The harbor drew a breath that went in at 1,000 noses and out at 1,000 chapped mouths. Davos looked downriver. The fog there trembled again, as it had on his first morning, and he could almost pretend it was the same moment repeating for his benefit, to give him a second chance at his first step. The fog thinned. A shape came through it. A long, lean boat with a prow like a knife and a sail patched so many times, it had become a story about all the places a man could find cloth. It came toward the green light like a man with a confession. Davos did not move. He stood and he waited. And he smiled because there is a sort of joy in watching other men come to a thing you have helped build, knowing that they will bring trouble and profit in equal measure, and that you will take both and call it a harbor. The boat slid up alongside, and a man in a ragged cap lifted his hand. He had teeth a tailor would have named irregular, and a face that had seen more wind than bread these last months. He looked up with the nakedness men wear only in front of gods or harbors. "Is it true?" he called. "It is," Davos answered. And the wind took his breath and tore it, and threw it back at him in little pieces, and he took them each and held them. "What is it?" the man asked. Davos set his good hand on the rope that lay on the cleat, and his bad one on the rail where it belonged. "Bread," he said. "And law." He thought for a heartbeat and then added, "Because sometimes a man must reward himself for work done with the luxury of honesty. And hope." The man nodded, as if it were all he had asked for, and more. He made his line fast, and looked toward the wolf's den where the law would be read again that evening, and then toward the beacon, where the stones had grown a handspan since morning, and then down at his own cracked hands, and smiled at them as if they were new. Men moved. The harbor took another breath. The free boards thrummed as if a harp were strung under them, and some great finger drew over the strings. It was as ugly and as beautiful as any song that was sung to make men forget a winter while they survived it. Davos listened to it like a man who had paid for the right to hear with sons and with years and with parts of his own flesh. He listened, and he stood, and he made himself a promise he had no right to make, and every right to keep, that he would hold the harbor against winter and men alike long enough for it to make itself into a thing that did not need him. The snow began to fall then. Soft, fat, insolent flakes that made the stones look gentle, and the ropes look old, and the men look younger than they were. It softened the hard lines of the wolf's den, and made it look for a heartbeat like a cake a child had been told he could not yet cut. Davos raised his face into it, closed his eyes against the sting, and laughed. A low, unlovely, grateful sound that disappeared into the wind, as if the wind had been waiting for it. When he opened his eyes, the boy with the torn ear stood at his elbow, as if he had stepped from the snow itself. "Tomorrow," the boy said, in a voice that had learned to be low, even when it wanted to climb. "Come to the East Quay at dawn, if you want to see wolves." Davos nodded, because he had learned the harbor's other law, which is that men must let certain promises sit in the air without hand or rope to hold them, or else they will fall apart. He did not say yes. He did not say anything. He watched the snow gather on the boy's cap, and he did not brush it off. Night came, which is a kind of law that does not need a charter. The green lamps burned. The wolf on the merman's banner, which was not there and never had been, showed itself to him anyway out of tiredness and stubborn hope. He stood until the snow had made him white as an old man, and then he went inside and listened again to the law, read in voices he trusted more each time they spoke. He ate simple food that had not needed to dress itself as something else to be loved. He went to his straw and put his hand under his head, as if he were a boy on a deck, and the river were a lullaby that needed only a rope to make it safe. He slept. In his dream, the beacon was a tower already, and the free port was a word in the mouths of men east and west. And his boys sat with him at a harborside table, and argued about whether the lampreys were better than the onions, and he did not correct them because they were all wrong, and all right, and would learn in time that a harbor's food tastes mostly of what you bring to it. He woke before dawn, as he always did, because the tide has a bell in it, and his bones had answered to it longer than any lord's horn. He rose, he dressed. He took the law into his breast for warmth, and he went to the East Quay with the snow making a soft noise under his boots that he pretended was the sound of a future coming quiet and hard. There, where the river narrowed and showed its teeth in little white tongues around the piles, the boy waited. He wore a new scarf, and looked like a thief who had made a bargain with a baker, and been paid partly in kindness. He lifted his chin toward the winter light that was not yet a light. "Wolves," he said, and the word left his mouth and ran before them like a clever dog. Davos followed it. He had built a harbor for bread and law. He would build a harbor for wolves. He did not yet know how the two would make a third thing, but he knew the river would teach him if he listened. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder, lightly, as if he were making fast to a cleat with no strain on the line, and felt the thinness of it and the strength. They walked out into a day that had not yet decided what sort of trouble it would be, and Davos welcomed it in his way, which was to make ready the ropes and mark the water and bless it with the small half-priesthood of men who have learned to keep other men alive with rule and wood and work. The Free Port Alliance at White Harbor had been born in hunger and ink. It would grow in the teeth of wolves. It would grow anyway, because men needed it to. And the river, which keeps all secrets and names them weather, went on speaking. And those who had the wit to hear kept their feet where it told them to put them. Cow. Dawn came wearing the same gray it had worn the day before, but it felt newer, because men were waiting for it to make a promise. The boy with the torn ear had a way of standing that made him look as if he leaned forward without moving at all. Davos matched the stance without thinking, as a man adjusts to a ship's deck he trusts. The East Quay had less talk than the free boards on the river. The water here ran close and quick between the piles, teeth bared in little rills. A gull hung motionless on the wind, and then was gone in a lazy tilt of wing, as if the cold were a game birds played with themselves. Hedrick stood where the quay narrowed to a finger that pointed toward nothing obvious. He had his hands wrapped in a length of sailcloth, and his breath made a smoke that the river stole and tore into pieces. Beside him was a boat like a louse with a board for a back, one of those Sisterton hide luggers that could be dragged over ice if a man were as stubborn as the boat. In it sat two men whose faces had been learned by wind. They had the sisters' winkles around their eyes, and the sister's chin that looked sharpened on a keel. "Get in," Hedrick said, as if saying a thing quietly could keep truth from turning its head. Davos put his foot in the boat and felt the hide flex. It was a different conversation than Wood. Wood spoke in language a shipwright could write down. Hyde answered with a shrug that said, "You are a foolish man, and I am a foolish boat, and this has worked before." He obeyed the boat's rules. The boy slid in and took an oar, and Hedrick the other, and the two sistermen put their weight to poles and eased them out into the thin channel between ice plates. The poles rang sometimes against a stone and made a sound like a bell underwater. They went along the lee of the island that held the den, under the old stone whose face had been scoured by more winters than any man had counted honestly. The water there wore a lace of ice and broke it with the patience of a woman working a knot from a child's hair. Then the current took them, and their poles only told the boat when to pretend it had chosen to move. A bend hid the den's bulk and the quays, and in the smallness of that bend was privacy enough to make truths think themselves safe. The dawn widened to something like day. The gray remained. Ahead lay a bight in the riverbank where men of the harbor hid things they wished to feel clever about later. Winch handles that had broken on cold mornings, a cargo that did not like to be named, a tryst between a boy and a girl who would marry other people gladly enough. It was not a brave cove. It was only a place where wind forgot to insist. A boat already lay on the stones there, drawn up high like a beast that had licked its paws and gone to sleep. It was a skin boat with bone for ribs and cedar strips stitched to hide, a round-bellied thing whose line had not been decided by a shipwright so much as by the needs of the beast it had once covered. Two figures stood by it. One had a spear taller than he was, and wore his beard like a piece of winter. The other was a woman. Davos knew wildlings the way he knew storms, by their honesty. She stood as if it would never occur to her to do otherwise. She wore a man's coat with the man gone out of it long ago, and her hair was a color the North called brown, and the South would have named after chestnuts to feel warmer. Her eyes had the watchfulness of someone who had taught herself when to run and when to kill by learning the wind's moods. The dog at her heel was not a dog. Not really. Shaggy black fur took the light and made it corrupt. The creature's eyes were bright as wet moss. It did not show its teeth. It did not need to. "Morning," Edric said, cheerful as a man calling on a neighbor. "Half the harbor's asleep, and the other half is pretending to be." The woman's mouth bent in the small scorn of a person who has lived more honestly than men who own counting houses. "You brought the smuggler," she said. The words were northern, but the flat music of the far north, older than door lords and coin. "I brought the man who knows ropes," Hedrick answered. Davos inclined his head. He let the creature at her heels smell him. It sniffed at his glove, and then at his bad hand with a long care that made the skin there itch, as if frost had been laid on it. It looked up into his face and then looked away, dismissing him as neither food nor danger. He felt stupidly pleased. Osha, Hedrick offered, as if a name had to be paid like a toll. I've been called worse, the woman said. You're Davos. I heard your name in a place where only seals should hear it. She lifted her chin at the river. You've made noise. I brought law, Davos said. Noise was included. She studied him the way one looks at a knife one might someday need to steal. Law's the thing a man reaches for when he can't reach his knife, she said. And it's the thing a woman uses when men won't listen otherwise. Her eyes flicked to the boy with the torn ear. Good lad. The boy blushed to his ears, both the whole and the torn. He kicked at ice, and the ice cracked with the sound of a fine glass broken by a careless hand. We've no time for the way you lot like to talk around a thing, said the bearded man with the spear. His voice belonged to stone and the tide, and a part of the world where a man's father tells him 3 true things and then dies because there aren't 4. Here. But the boy lives. He's where we took him. The wolf lives. The wolf will live when we are gone. The girl lives. She listens. She don't talk if she don't have to. He cut a look toward Osha, and Osha returned it with a pride that did not need any man's help to stand up. You want him. The fat one in the seat wants him. The North wants him. The ones who wear men's skins like they weren't born to them fear him. All this is true, but the sea don't care. Davos felt, in his marrow, the queer lift he had known once when he had tasted the salt rain above the black water, and told himself he could still live through it. He did not say the boy's name because the river listened, and there were men in White Harbor who would kill for the pleasure of telling another man that they had heard Davos say that name with his own mouth. How far, he asked, and how hungry? Far enough, Osha said. That you can't draw a map without making a lord angry. Hungry enough that men grind old bone into dust and call it meal. I can feed mine and him and the wolf this month and next, not the month after. She lifted a hand. It was nicked and neat, used to rope and killing. I tell you this so you don't think I came here because I like the sound of my own voice. You came because the boy must be brought into a place where law will make men's hands behave, Davos said softly. I came because you're making a harbor that makes a different kind of man bold, Osha said. Bravos bold, the kind that counts and doesn't drink from a skull to make the counting easier. Sister bold, the kind that spits and then smiles. It's a different danger. She tilted her head toward the great lump of White Harbor beyond the bend. The fat lord's got words that will open doors. He's also got enemies who will come to a place like this to taste the food and piss on your free boards. I don't bring the boy into that unless I have a promise I can hold, and a boat that won't break when it hears a true story. Nenarti. Then hold this, Davos said. He drew the folded parchment from inside his doublet and put it into her hand carefully, as if it were meat and her dog would bite him if he startled it. Read this when you can, or have it read. That's the law we made yesterday. It says what men can't sell here, and what they can't lie about here. It says what we feed and what we charge. It says, if you come in under a green light, we'll hold off any man who thinks his color is brighter. He paused. It doesn't say names that shouldn't be said. That's a different law. She took the parchment with reluctance that had nothing to do with paper, and everything to do with the thing men make of paper. She did not look at it. She tucked it into the inside of her coat where she kept whatever she counted as dear. What do you need? Davos asked. Salt, said the spearman at once. Iron. Good iron, not the sort a crow might shit on and call his own. Needles. A sack of them. Rope, but rope that doesn't rot in 2 months. Oil. Dried peas and beans. A bell. Nanandor. A bell? For if a boy climbs a cliff and falls, and there's no one near enough to hear the sound his bones make, Osha said, very level. A bell to hang near the caves where a woman might go to sleep with the understanding that she wants to wake again. If men come we don't like, The bell rings. We go. If men come with honest hands, the bell rings. We cook. Davos nodded. A bell can be had. Honest hands take longer, but they can be found. We've got some in stock. Ben? And we need a word, Osha added. A word that will make lords of things stop themselves from doing the thing they take their pride in doing. A word they won't laugh at. She looked at him, openly cruel in her expectation. You'll have a word, Davos said. Lord Wyman will say it. He'll say, the wolf's den declares safe passage for a certain boat to certain waters. He'll keep the words as fat as he is, and as sharp as his conscience. Men who don't like it will pretend they never heard it. Men who matter will hear it twice. Bah! The bearded man shifted his spear on his palm, balancing it as if it were a story. If the boy comes with us again, and if we find men whose knives don't talk before their mouths do, we could bring him to a rock on the coast where a boat might nose in. Not to your pretty quays. Your pretty quays have too many eyes. Davos looked past them at the skirting ice and the weak light, and the day that had only the energy to be itself, and no more. He thought of charts held down with knives and of shoals that moved when you weren't looking. Show me, he said. On the water. I'll take a man who can count. Hedrick if I must. He half smiled. I'll take the boy. The boy's eyes flared at that, with a child's greed for being counted as a man, and a child's quick fear that men sometimes mean what they say. Osha measured the river, measured Davos, measured the dog's breath. Not today, she decided. You've got iron in your mouth and men watching to see whether you spit it out. Tomorrow or next after, if the wind comes right. We'll come up under the last of the ice when it doesn't make so much noise when we break it. We'll knock on your river like polite thieves, and you can see if your law can walk. Ma'am? She turned. The dog turned with her as if they shared a spine. The spearman tugged the little skin boat down, and the river nosed at it as at a strange calf. Then they were in, and poles bit the mud, and the strange vessel slid away with a smoothness that suggested the river liked it more than it liked any harbor craft. The boy with the torn ear watched them go with a thirst in him that made Davos pretend not to see. Come on, Hedrick said, pretending to have no feelings beyond appetite. If we stay here any longer, we'll turn to stone and the children will climb us for a game. They pushed back the way they had come. The hide-luggers sighed and agreed to the work. By the time they made the turn where the den's grim square reasserted the world's interest in men, the free boards had a small procession on them. The yellow veil ship, discharging sacks with careful contempt. A bravosi taking a pipe of oil as if it were pearls decanted. Two Ibanese rolling barrels, with a gravity that put one in mind of priests. Above them all, from a high window, a green lamp watched the river as if the river might do tricks to be praised. Tommen met them at the steps, as punctual as a tide that had read a clock. He listened without interrupting, which was the rarest gift any steward could give a man. Tell Lord Wyman, Davos said when he had finished. But not in a hall that barks echo. Tell him in a room that remembers whispers and keeps them as if they were coins. He glanced toward the counting house. And tell Noho's clerk to write a letter in which nothing is said that any man could read, and everything is said if a bravosi reads it. Tommen grimaced. He'll enjoy that. Then, with a glance to the boy, he added, the boy's no use today. Take him to the chain crew. Let him learn the sound iron makes when it talks to ice. The boy went willingly enough, which is how a man knows he has given a boy a gift, and not a chore. Hedrick spat into the water where the chain's dark belly went down, and men pretended the river would pull it into a place it would like, and then he spat again to make sure the first spit had company and wasn't lonely. The business of the Freeport ruled the day. There was a fray-faced barge that came up from downriver like a rash. It had no heraldry that a polite man could point at and call vulgar. The men on it wore brown and gray and had fingers that counted too readily and eyes that did not. Their spokesman had a mouth that smiled when his chest was sore and his heart smelted lead. Harbor fees, he said, as if he were doing Davos a favor by remembering to mention them. Free boards, Tommen answered, as if he were excusing a forgetful child for failing to do a sum. Lord of Winterfell, said the fray in the barge, and the words came out like bad meat half chewed. Has an interest. So does the river, Tommen said. He leaned a little on the bell rope set in the counting house wall. It made a small, suggestive sound. Our Lord, too. You may speak to him as soon as your feet touch stone. Until then, this is a harbor. He said harbor, the way a sword says its own name under a whetstone. They spoke to Wyman that afternoon in a chamber whose walls had seen secrets cross them like migrating geese for 100 years and never once felt compelled to tell another wall about it. The big man held a law scroll like a lover and arranged his face like a bishop. He listened to the fray man and blinked only when politeness demanded it. I see, he said at intervals, in a tone that suggested that any true understanding would be delayed until after the man had gone, and the chair was empty. Of course. When the fray finally ran down, Wyman asked Tommen to take him to the kitchens and feed him. It sounded like charity and was also cruelty. Men who have to walk past ovens to go back to a cold barge think differently about tariff and about winter. It was the sort of lesson a lord should assign to a steward and pretend not to have thought of. When they were gone, Wyman let the law scroll relax and breathed out. The breath seemed to carry half a day's weight. You met your wolves, he said without looking at Davos. I met a woman who believes what the river tells her, Davos said. And a man who thinks food and steel are both honest names for the same thing, and a beast with eyes like moss in winter. Wyman smiled with one side of his mouth. He is what he is, he said. We have rumor. We have whispers from headsmen who aren't as clever as they suppose. We have old fishers who swear to the sight of a black shadow on a black rock. We have you standing in my room telling me that words can be made into a bridge if we say them straight. He shifted. The chair allowed him to be a different shape for a while. We will give them what they asked for. Salt and iron and peas and a bell. A small bell that makes a big noise. Nemtro. And words, Davos said. A charter within the charter. A writ for a boat without a name, Wyman finished. We'll write it on old paper, so men will not notice it's new. He glanced to the window slit that showed a slice of gray. We should send a man with it who can hold a rope and a lie with the same hand. You have one, Davos said. He will go. Wyman's blue eyes were full of the weariness of a man who has to be two things at once. You have a harbor to build, he said gently. A harbor will still be there in 7 days, Davos answered. It will be there in 7 years if you do this. If you don't, it will be a story men tell to make their evenings shorter. They looked at one another across the space where law and hunger shared a table. Wyman's hand went to his breast and pressed there, not theatrically, not excessively, but as if two hearts beat under the fat and each needed to be held quiet by the other. He nodded once. Take Hedrick, he said. He can spit in 3 languages. Take 2 sister boats. Take Tommen's boy to keep your tongue in the right order. Take a bell and let it ring in your pocket when you feel like saying a name we have both agreed not to say. Go and be small on the water. Be small and clever. I will be large and stupid here, and both works will be a kind of priesthood. And thou? Davos bowed his head and accepted the 2 priesthoods as equal sacraments. There is one more thing, he said. The beacon. Let it keep growing. The first time a ship sees it through a squall that would have ended in wood and bone, this place becomes a word men keep between their teeth to make themselves brave. Then, Wyman waved a hand like a pelican settling its feathers. I have boys heaving stones as we speak. They like the work. It makes their arms look like the arms of men in their own eyes. Evening came as if poured. The law was read again, because repetition is how men teach their hands to do what their mouths promise. Usyk drank less that night and counted more, which was a thing to make a steward sleep with a smile. Noho sent a letter south wrapped in oilskin and humor, and nothing in it of any interest to a man who did not know the exact price of a rope in Mar when Mir was short of hemp. Hedrick found a boy to swear at and a woman to smile at, and made a plan that looked like a story of 3 lines. Go, look, speak. Then he rewrapped it in curses so no god would notice and spoil it out of spite. At morning's first break, they slipped away. The sister hide-luggers had no brightness to betray them. Their hides were the color of river, and the river liked the taste of them, as it likes a seal's flank. They went narrow and low along the east bank, and then turned out and hid in a wave's shadow. and then were seen again briefly by a gull that didn't care about men's conspiracies. Far off, the beacon's newborn heap looked like a wart on the world's lip and made Davos absurdly proud. They went downriver into the mouth and then along the coast where the North remembers why it is North. The land there had no reason to apologize for anything. It rose in shoulders of dark stone that had decided to stay forever and let the sea chew at their toes for practice. The sea obliged, sending up spray that froze as it flew and struck the cliff in 1,000 brittle arrows. The wind out there had a different truth in it. It didn't believe in men at all. It shrugged them aside and gave leave only to those who remembered to make themselves small, as Wyman had said. Davos owned his smallness with a freedom that was like the first deep breath a man takes after hiding too long. Hedrick and the boy and the sisterman pulled or paddled as the water demanded. They slid into a bight where the shore grew teeth, black rocks like molars rising from a jaw of sand, and waited under an overhang for the rest of the world to forget them. Somewhere behind them, White Harbor sat on its river and pretended to be less than it was. Somewhere ahead, Skagos lifted its own hard face into a sky that has never learned to be a friend. They did not go to Skagos. Not that day. Men who sailed straight at a truth in this country often ended with their faces washed clean of everything that had made them men. They waited to be invited. It came at noon, with the tide turning reluctant as an old man in a warm bed. A skin boat came round a finger of rock, making no more noise than a fish. Osha sat in it, and the spearman, and another woman whose eyes were too young for the scars on her hands. They beached without theater. Osha stepped out and smelled the wind, as if thought were a scent that could be followed. Davos showed her the bell. It was small and thick-walled, with a clapper of iron that made a sober, carrying sound. He rang it once. The cliff gave the note back in a whisper that could not be mistaken for anything else. "Good," she said. "That one can go in a cave and frighten rats and men alike." He showed her the rope, hemp soaked in oil, wound with a thread of wire against mice. He showed her the needles, the little iron kisses that women use to sew flesh and cloth. He showed her the peas and beans in little bags of coarse weave, the 2 small knives that would not shame a man's belt, the 2 sacks of salt tied very tight, because salt loves to escape. She showed him nothing. It would have been wrong if she had. She gave him a name that was not the boy's name, and could be said in a lord's chamber without the stones becoming spies. She gave him a rock on the coast where a longship could be hid behind a point, and where the tide would serve at dawn and dusk both, if a man knew how to read a moon. She gave him a mark to cut into the side of a plank so other men would not call it vandalism and knife him for his foolishness. These were gifts worth sons. He received them like that. Hedrick asked a question too long to be wise. Osha lifted an eyebrow that peeled him back like bark. He shut his mouth. The boy with the torn ear grinned without sound. They huddled there for half a day, the rock around them like an animal they had crawled inside to borrow its heat from. They spoke in currents and eddies, never naming what every thought shared. Davos told her exactly how the green lamps were set, how the wolf's den bell was rung, where the chain in the harbor lay, and how men pulled it when ice came and called itself a prophet. Osha told him exactly where not to set a foot if he wanted to live to put another, which is a kind of kindness any lord should envy. Hedrick told a story about a sister woman who married a rock and had 3 sons with it, and the rock kept the boys safe even after she left. "You people think we laugh at you," he said. "We don't. We laugh because the wind would take us otherwise." No one argued. They went back as they had come, small, and the sea pretended it had not noticed them. The harbor looked different when you returned to it with secrets. It looked larger in some places and smaller in others, as if the secrets had been taken out of it like bowls, and left the shelves behind them showing dust. Men still moved loads and argued in the talk that keeps frost out of a man's blood. The beacon had grown a handspan, as it would every day for a season if men kept loving stones. Tommen met them with a look that counted them without insulting them by naming his count. "Wyman writes," he said, as if writing were a physical act like moving barrels. "And Noho's clerk is in love with his own pen." The Frey barge left with the insult it came for and 2 loaves of bread to remember us by. The chain sang. Ozik's barrel leaked and he was gentle until the 5th patch, and then he ceased to be gentle. Hedrick's place at the stew bowl is unfilled, and 2 men tried to start a quarrel over it, and made one. So we have a schedule now for who eats where, and we have made a rule that if you quarrel over stew, you eat last. I'll fight a man for a stew if he puts pepper in it beyond a Bravos's allowance, Hedrick said easily. But I'll do it after. Good, Tommen said, dry as a rope left in a hut. Now we have 2 ideas of law today, and no more time. Come. Men? In the den, Wyman sat with a letter in his hand, and the kind of weariness about his eyes that makes a man look briefly thin, regardless of how the rest of him votes. He did not ask aloud whether they had seen what they had gone to see. He lowered his eyes to the writ he had made. To all and several who set oar or sail within sight of the merman's light, he read, in a voice that had the weight of bells, be it known that by right of harbor and by custom of river and by the needs of men, passage is granted by the Wolf's Den to a single skin boat, or any boat that shall carry the mark here described, from such rocks as lie east and north to such quays as may be named in the mouth of a man whose hands are none to the... This writ binds only those whom it binds, which is to say, men of White Harbor, men of the Sisters, and those in amity with them, and it troubles no other man's prerogative if he should choose to call it nothing. It is a gnat that bites when you are sleeping. If you are awake, you will not notice it. His mouth made a little amused twist. You hear the fat in it. I hear the teeth in it, Davos said. May I have it? You may hold it, Wyman said. And you may deliver it to a boat that does not exist, when the time comes. He set it back on the table. The time will come. It always does, even when men prefer it not to. Then twice. The days that followed were busy in the way that makes weeks seem short, and winters bearable. A ship from the east came with silks that no man needed, and that women touched with hands that had chapped on tallow and called beautiful anyway. Tommen taxed those and spent the coin on iron bolts and on men to seat them. Hedrick found a brawl before noon and a song after dark, and mended both with a shrug. The boy with the torn ear learned to hear when the chain wanted a man to ease, when to heave, when to swear, and when to keep his mouth like a knot. Noho wrote a paper he claimed was a perjury of numbers, and laughed in a way that reminded men why Bravos runs double on some days, once on coin and once on jokes no one else understands. Twice, men came with names that might make a coward braver. Bolton men with their faces plain and their words careful. Frey men with their words plain and their faces careful. Twice they went away with their bellies full and their minds less so. Wyman played the Lord as if he had rehearsed in another body, and now found the costume fit him too well. He said yes, where a no would have cost the harbor nothing, and no where a yes would have been easy and wrong. Men left more uncertain than they came, which was a victory when the men were Freys. At last a wind came that Osha had said would be a yes. It came out of the west and brought with it the sweet rot of thaw and the dirty laugh of slush underfoot. Ice went loose like old men in spring. The river's color changed, not much, just enough to make a man who loved it take notice. Davos felt it in his hands and in his mouth, and in the way a rope looked to him when it lay slack, and waited. He went to the east quay without being summoned. Hedrick waited there with a face that pretended to have seen nothing worth remembering. The boy wore a cap with ear flaps, and a pride that showed underneath it like untidy hair. Tommen came down with them without being asked, as if a steward could sometimes be a man without offense. They took the little hide again. It knew the road now. It went like a rat along a baseboard. They slid into the Cove of Teeth and waited. The wind ran around them like a dog that will not lie down and be stroked. When at last the skinboat came, it came the way a truth comes, as if it had been there all along and only chose that moment to be seen. Osha's eyes shone like a cold thing polished. She did not waste time. She put a bundle into Davos' hands. Small and warm and heavy in the ways that matter. He did not open it. It smelled of smoke and child and dog. His hands remembered holding such things and were steady because of that, not in spite of it. "You'll not see him here," she said. "You'll see a piece of him, and you'll take that to the fat lord, and he'll put it in his mind where his hunger is, and it'll keep him fed for a while." Her eyes dared him to hope beyond that. "What piece?" Hedrick asked, as if pieces were a currency he knew well. Osha gave him a look that told him he did not. Davos cradled the bundle and did not look down. "I know enough," he said. "The law will hold. The bell will ring. Tell the boy the harbor's made itself a promise, and hates being called a liar more than any Frey could." She nodded. "He has a wolf," she said. "He is less afraid than he should be. He is more afraid than he shows. He is a Stark and a child. Men will try to make him a tale they like to tell. I aim to keep him a boy." "Keep him a boy," Davos said. "Let the North make him a lord when it's done bleeding." He paused. "When we come, we'll come under the mark. We'll bring a boat that can take a wave into its mouth and spit it out." "You'll bring more than that," Osha said. "You'll bring clean hands. If your hands aren't clean, I'll see it and the wolf will smell it, and there won't be a need to ring any bell." "Then?" "Isten." The bearded man leaned on his spear and looked out past Davos' shoulder at the river, which had no interest in their conversation. "Bring a man who can shoot a bow without teaching the bow to sing while has at it. Bring meat that isn't old with someone else's hunger. Bring a promise you can keep even if it kills you to keep it." Davos nodded once. He had made such promises. He had kept some. He had not kept others, and had paid. He put the bundle inside his coat, and felt it settle against his chest, like a small truth deciding to stay. They parted with no more ceremony than two men passing on a stair. On the way back, the boy with the torn ear said softly, "Was it him?" And Davos answered the way a harbor answers when asked if it will hold a rope. "It will." At the den, Wyman took the bundle with hands that trembled once. He did not open it either. He pressed it to his shoulder the way a man does when he has not held a child in too long and does not want to cry in front of men who believe crying should be left for wives. Then he put it on the table and lifted the cloth. Inside lay a toy. It was a clumsy little thing carved from driftwood and rubbed with grease to make a sheen. It was meant to be a wolf, and it was a wolf, and any man could have carved it and any man could have said so. But along its back, with a child's careful hand, someone had scratched lines that were not letters because a child had made them, but were letters because a man could read them. A star, another star, a stick between. The North. The way children write it when they do not know a word, but know what a word is for. Wyman inhaled. It was a sound that could have been a laugh and could have been a wound. "Good," he said. "Good." He covered the thing with the cloth again and pressed his palm upon it, like a seal on wax. He lifted his head. His eyes were wet without shame. "Now we are finished making our harbor," he said. "And we can begin making our war." Davos did not argue with the order of things. Sometimes a law builds a wall. Sometimes it opens a gate. Sometimes, without changing a word, it lays the first stone of a road that ends under a keep's door. The Freeport did not pause for Wyman's new purpose. Men still brought sacks and spilled fish and cursed rope and praised it. The beacon climbed, like a thought a man has while he works, and will not leave him until it becomes a deed. A sister sloop rubbed along a pile and left a smear of paint that looked like a bruise. Hedrick laughed and called it a love mark. A Vale ship came again and was less careful, which meant the free boards had begun to school lords in humility in the way only boards can. Noho negotiated with the Taroshi, who had dyed his beard a color it would have been a mercy to call blue. Ozik found a way to pour oil faster without spilling, which is a kind of engineering men should honor with bells. Tommen set boys to carry sand to the beacon's base with little baskets because men tire and boys only learn. On a cold midday, snow sifting down fine as flour, a rider came across the North Road. He wore good fur and moved as if his saddle did not belong to him. He had a face that would do well at a table where lies are told as if they were jokes. He bore a letter with a hand that feared neither ink nor what ink could make men do. Tommen read it in the gatehouse and let his face become a thing no one could use. He took it to Wyman in a room that had a smaller fire than the Merman's Hall and a bigger silence. The Dreadfort. Wyman said aloud after reading, his tone as if he were diagnosing a disease. Lord Ramsay sends us his love. The words could not be made to be only words. He says free is a word men used to mean mine, and he reminds us that Winterfell's doors are open to guests who observe their host's rights. He has always been fond of guests. He says he is pleased to see our lamp burning. He suggests that if the wind blows it out, we will be happier to have saved the oil. He folded the letter once, twice, again, until it was a tight packet, and then let his hands open, and the paper fell as dead as a small bird. He has spies on our quays. He has spies everywhere men need bread, Davos said. The Dreadfort lives on hunger. We will feed ours, Wyman said, with the brutality mercy sometimes requires. And we will teach our spies to starve. He glanced up at Davos. If you were a smuggler still, how would you watch this harbor? From the water, Davos said at once. A boat with no sail and no name, under the meat hook of a low cloud at dusk. A man under the end of a quay counting in his head, not looking. A boy with a cap asking nothing and hearing everything. A woman with a basket who goes to the beacon with bread and comes back with stones. We have those, Wyman said. They are ours. Some are theirs. It will be a pleasure to let the river decide which are which. That night, Davos stood on the freeboards and listened to the chain speak in the mouth. It had a faint, questioning hum in it that he did not care for. He told Tommen to ease it when the tide turned and to check the far capstan for frost inside the pall. Tommen rolled his eyes in the polite way men do and did it, and when the capstan's insides were found to have a skim of ice as thin as a lie, he did not say it aloud, he only looked, which is the sort of apology Davos valued. The bell of the den rang. Men gathered to hear the law again, and pretended to be bored and were not. Davos thought of Osha and the bearded man, and the child's wolf cut from wood, and rubbed with grease until it shone. He thought of the way Wyman's big hand had pressed the cloth, and made of the act a prayer that needed no god to make it valid. He thought of the boat that would need to be built or bought, of the men who would sit in it, and of the sea which, as the spearman had so rightly said, does not care. When the bell quieted, another sound came into the harbor, one it had not heard in some seasons. It was a horn, long and deep, blown from out beyond the beacon. It carried in a way that made skin rise under wool. It was not a war horn. It was a sea horn. The kind men blow when fog eats sight, and they would rather not rub their hulls blind. Tommen went to the quay's edge as if pulled. Davos was already there. Out of the mist came a shape like a memory of summers before some men here had been born. Long, lean, tall of prow. Its dragon's head rubbed smooth by much weather. A ship out of Skagos or someplace near it slid in, proud without trying. Men aboard her wore furs and the air of those who hate being inspected. They gave the green lamps a look that was almost a challenge, and then a nod that was almost respect. Hedrick breathed out a word in his sister tongue that meant, roughly, foolhardy beautiful, and Davos could not disagree. They did not tie up to the free boards. They did not deign to. They sent a small boat with 3 men and a woman to the foot of the quay, and the woman stood when they came near and lifted a hand empty of weapon. She had hair like iron scraped clean and a scar across her jaw that had healed with a bump in it, like a knot in a rope. She held up a strip of wood. The mark cut into it matched the one Wyman's writ described, a small notch and a longer, like a river and a road crossing, and a little star after, where the star should be. Tommen did not bow. He nodded. Davos did neither. He lifted the writ and let the light of the green lamp fall across it, as if it were a church window. The woman looked at it without reverence and with attention. "Safe passage," she said in a voice that the river would respect. "Under the eye." "Under the eye," Davos agreed. She stepped up onto the lowest step, as if testing whether the stone belonged to the river or to men. It accepted her. She came to stand on the planking and looked over Davos' shoulder into the den, though the den could not be seen from there. Then she handed him a sack that clinked. He did not open it. He did not need to. It was not coins. It was small black stones, smooth and light, and the sack stank faintly of eggshells and fire. Obsidian. Davos' mouth opened. He closed it. He had nothing to say that would improve silence. Tommen leaned half an inch and read the weight with a steward's eye. Hedrick swore, softly, in awe. "For your light," the woman said. "For your chain. For your bell. For your law?" She smiled without warmth. "The sea doesn't care. But sometimes rocks do." Davos liked her greatly in that moment. He liked her more for not bothering to coin the gift. Skagos had brought a thing that would be needed for wars too large to fit in a counting house, and she had given it as if buying bread. It was the best offering law can make to war. Implacable, useful, unadorned. "Then eat," Tommen said at once. "Because a steward in love with the harbor must marry hospitality when it knocks. You don't need to love us. You need to eat." They ate in the counting house because the den would have made it a political act, and the counting house made it a meal. The Skagosi ate like people who feared what food might ask of them if they were too grateful. They looked at the stew as if it were a test and passed it. The woman with the iron hair took the law in both hands and read it as if it were a spear's haft. She grunted once when she came to the clause that named the chain and how it would be eased. Davos did not ask what the grunt meant. He did not wish to be told he had been clever if it might make him careless. They left at dusk. The dragon prow went through the mouth with the chain humming a little, as if singing them out. Men on the quays kept their faces. Only after the stern had vanished into mist did Hedrick let out a long-held breath and said, softly, "We are a story now," in a way that made stories a very serious business indeed. Night closed its hand around the harbor. The freeboards creaked a little, settling into the cold. The beacon's small fire licked the stones and seemed to consider the sky as a thing it might one day challenge. The bell slept. Davos walked the length of the lawn nailed to the counting houses and spoke it half under his breath. Men looked at him and decided a man saying law like a prayer was a man who could be left alone to his eccentricities. He finished and stood in the place where the east quay met the river's truer current. He smelled smoke far off again, that same not white harbor scent, and thought suddenly of a camp one night years ago, when he and Saladhor San had pretended to be kings of an island of their own for an evening, and how they had made a law there too. That was no good in the morning because the morning belonged to other men. He smiled without humor, and loved this law more fiercely because of it. This one would belong to morning and to the next and the next after, if he gave it enough of his back. He did not hear the child come up beside him. He knew the boy was there because the air moved differently, lightly, like a hand that has learned not to jar a sleeping man. The boy had no cap now, and his hair sat in little damp curls from the snow. "Will he come?" the boy asked, as if the question had a person in it that was not the he had meant before. "Yes," Davos said. "He will come because the river wants him too." "You say the river wants things like it's a person. It is older than any person you can name," Davos said. "It remembers what men forget. It wants men to keep its path clean. It wants to have stories told about it in the mouths of old fishers and young fools. It wants a light at its mouth so it can find home when the sea makes it drunk." He paused. "And it wants wolves. Rivers do. They like seeing on their banks something the city cannot own." The boy thought about this with very serious eyes, as if a man had offered him a sword from a kind of metal he had never heard of, and told him to test it. "I want that too," he said. "The last bit. The bit about the city not owning everything it looks at." "Now," Davos put his good hand on the boy's shoulder, and the boy did not shake it off. "Remember it," he said. "When you grow up and someone gives you a chair. Chairs make thieves of men who never wanted to steal." The boy nodded, as if he had always known that, and was glad to have it confirmed by someone who had sat in just enough chairs to make his caution worth heeding. The winter marched. It always does. It marched with its face turned a little toward spring as if considering forgiveness. The Freeport took men in and sent men out and taught itself to be the kind of place that greedy men call foolish. Greedy men are often slow to understand the cleverness that won't look at them. The beacon rose. The chain learned new songs. The law read itself into the bones of the quays. Then the day came when a little boat with the mark cut into its side knocked politely on the river, and Wyman's writ went out to meet it in Davos coat. The sky wore a thin, bright blue, as if someone had torn a sheet of better weather and laid a scrap over the North's bald head. The river had a skin of light. Men breathed as if their chests had forgotten the weight, and now remembered what air could be. They did not make a procession. Hedrick did not sing. Tommen did not bring a bell. The boy did not tell anyone where he was going. They went into the mouth and along the teeth, and out into the loosened sea like a thought a man does not say aloud for fear of jinxing it. They came to the rock Osha had named and found, under it, a shadow that was not a shadow. The skin boat came first as before, with no sound in it. Osha had a look on her that made Davos' hair shift under his cap. The look of a woman who has shown a child a thing, and now waits to see if the child will put it in his mouth and choke. They slid in among weed that had the color of old bruises and smelt of a tide that had known more dead than live men. A wave came in and went out and left them in a pocket of stillness, with the sound of the world holding its breath. Footsteps. Not many. Not theatrical. A woman came first, hair braided, a knife at her hip, another behind her. Then, between them, a boy. He was thin with a thinness that would fill when there were more days like this one than like the days that had made him. His hair was dark as tar, gone wild and cut with a knife, and then allowed to be whatever shapes it liked. His eyes were the North's eyes. He had a wolf beside him, black as a raven's back, and larger than any dog had a right to be without asking a god to explain. The wolf looked at Davos as if he were a new kind of meat it had decided not to try yet. The boy looked at the boats and the men and the river. He looked at the law in Davos' coat as if he could feel it through the cloth. He looked at Hedrick's torn ear and smiled at it, and then at the boy with the torn ear and smiled again, as if they had just agreed on a private joke. He did not speak. Osha spoke for him. She said a thing that was not his name, and was his name too. She said a thing about wolves eating Freys if Freys tried to teach them to dance. She said a thing about salt and iron and bells. She named the place where they would come in 2 nights hence, when the moon sat like a coin on the lip of the world. Davos nodded. He could not make his mouth do anything else that would be of use. He put his hand in his coat and drew out Wyman's writ and held it like a torch he did not remember to fear. The boy reached out and touched the bottom edge of the parchment with one finger. Then he withdrew his hand and put it on the wolf's neck, and the wolf sighed as if bored. Soon, Osha said. It was not a question. Soon, Davos said. They went back to the harbor as if their boat had been born from it. The beacon had grown again, and men were drying nets on the free boards as if no boy and no wolf had stood under a cliff and looked at Davos Seaworth's heart with a child's impunity. Tommen met them with a question in his face that he did not insult them by asking. In the den, Wyman stood up with a creak like a war galley turned on a sandbar, and sat down again. Hard and laughed his small laugh that made the fat on his cheeks tremble, like a woman's soft belly. Good, he said. Then we will make bread and law, until they come. And when they come, we will make a home out of a harbor, for a boy who must be a story and a man who must be a harbor. He looked at the wolf carved under the cloth and did not touch it. My cooks will salt a pig, he added, absurd and perfect, and my steward will sharpen quills. Your steward, Tommen said, will sharpen knives. Those two, Wyman allowed. The Freeport Alliance was a phrase that began to be used by men who liked to name things after they had already lived in them. It meant different things depending on who spoke it. To the Bravosi, it meant a place to lay off risk and call it foresight. To the Ibanese, it meant oil changed to coin without someone else's hand too many times in the middle. To the sisters, it meant bread and rope and a lamp in a gray that had killed men's mothers. To Wyman, it meant a net he could cast without anyone seeing the knots. To Davos, it meant a room in the world where his boys might have eaten, if the world had been kinder the day he needed it to be. And to a boy under a cliff, with a wolf leaning into his leg as if the boy were the only true thing left in the world, it meant a green light against a sky that had not loved him for a long time. 2 nights later, the moon came up looking like a coin someone had worried with a thumb. The chain in the harbor hummed once and settled. The law was read as always, and men rolled it in their mouths like a drink that might be stronger than it smells. Tommen counted men without counting them. Hedrick spat a little for luck and did not say what he was thinking. Ozik pretended to be asleep and was not. Noho pretended to be awake and was. Entirely. Davos went out with the hide, and the boy, and Hedrick, and a rope that had been given a blessing by no priest, and every man who had ever trusted it. They went to the rock and waited, and the sea, which does not care, gave them a gift because sometimes it does. Osha came first, as ever. Then women, with the boy between. Then the wolf, unhurried and suspicious, and too beautiful to be called beautiful by men who intended to keep their wits. They stepped into the boat, as people step into houses they don't own. Softly, with that insolence born of necessity. Davos set his hand on the prow, and sent a prayer to a god he did not claim loudly. It went like this: not for me. The river took them. The beacon's new height made a path of light no man could have drawn. Only a story can draw a path like that. They slid into the mouth as the chain was eased, and the bell did not ring because bells are for when men doubt their courage. The free boards were empty in the way that means men are watching without being seen. Lord Wyman waited in the den, not on his chair, but standing. He had on him a coat of green so dark it might have been black in another hall, and around his neck the chain he'd inherited from some thinner lord. His eyes were blue and bright and wet. Davos and Tommen and Hedrick stood with him. Noho held his mouth as if keeping in laughter that would be rude. Ozik smelled of oil and panic and a father's pride. The boy with the torn ear stood at the back and tried not to be. They came in, the three women and the boy and the wolf. And the den remembered long ago nights when wolves had stood under any roof and called it theirs by right. Osha looked at Wyman as if ready to cut a throat and surprised into not having to. The boy looked at Wyman and saw a man who had eaten well because he had made himself a plate, and his mouth twitched at the edges and stopped and was still. Wyman got down on his knees as easily as a whale could be imagined doing such a thing. And he put his hands on the boy's shoulders, and he put his forehead to the boy's forehead, and he said very softly, so softly, that only men who listen to ropes and ice and breath can hear. The North remembers. The wolf exhaled a sound like a bellows being pulled once, and put his massive head down between boy and lord as if to declare terms in his own ancient tongue. Everyone present accepted those terms because it was sensible to do so, and because sometimes a new law is written without ink. Davos looked at the boy, and at the wolf and at Wyman, and he thought, not for me again. And then he allowed himself the smallest, sharpest bit of greed a man like him can afford. For us. He did not know yet which men would die because of the thing they had done, or which ships would break, or which letters he would have to carry folded inside his doublet like contraband. He did not know which chair he would have to tip over. He did not know whether the beacon would stand a storm it had not yet imagined. He knew only that a harbor had made a place for a boy the way a ship makes a place for a mast. Not easily, not without shaping and cutting, but with certainty born of necessity. He knew this harbor would earn its name twice now, once in ledger, once in song. Outside the snow came down again, fat and insolent, and made the stones soft with the lie of gentleness. The green lamps burned. Somewhere beyond the mouth, a longship turned her dragon head to the sea, and went to tell rocks that there was a light now at the river, and it would not be put out. Somewhere far away, a man with pink in his banners smiled, and did not yet know why his smile would hurt him later. Somewhere nearer, a Bravosi took up a pen and wrote a figure in a ledger, and whistled tunelessly, and thought about lamprey pies. Davos stood in the den and watched Wyman take a breath, and become two men at once. The one the Boltons expected, and the one the North needed. He watched the boy lift his chin without arrogance. He watched the wolf lay down with his head on his paws, as if he were bored. He watched Tommen wipe a hand under his eye and pretend it was a fleck of ash. He watched Hedrick put his hand on the boy's shoulder for a heartbeat, and remove it before anyone's pride could decide to object. The law on the walls did not change its words. It did not need to. Men had changed theirs to fit it. Later, when the boy slept in a room that had been scrubbed without becoming clean, and the wolf slept with one eye reluctant to close, and men pretended they had always known this would happen, Davos went out into the night and stood by the chain and listened to the mouth of the river speaking little truths. He felt his stumps ache, and his good hand go numb, and his heart warm itself on the coals of a foolish hope. He thought of a boat, still to be chosen, still to be blessed by the sea only in the way the sea blesses, by not killing it. He thought of Skagos, and of a woman who would walk into a storm with a knife and a grin. He thought of a writ that told the truth in a way that would make a liar's ears ring. He thought of bread and law and hope, the three planks of a harbor that would serve them all. He breathed frost and let it sting. He stayed until the dark lighter at the east became not light, but the possibility of it. Then he went in to tell Wyman how the dawn would be, as if he had any right to speak for it. Perhaps he did, a little. He had made a harbor where dawns could change things. The river agreed, in its way, knocking at the piles to say, "I will do my part, if you do yours." He tapped the rail with his knuckles, a secret answer where no one could see him being sentimental. He told the wood and the water.